I'll start this off by saying, no, this isn't my story, but it was such a crazy encounter that I have asked each of my friends through the years to recount the events. This happened around the year 2000. About a year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends, and that's when I first heard about this dog-wolf story. I have since asked each friend over years and miles apart, and they all remember the exact same encounter. Before my ex was even my boyfriend, let's call him Jay, he and our other friends were about 17 to 18 years old. At that age, I remember it being an adventure to find a place to smoke. Let's hike to so-and-so and puff. The good old days when we got away from parents and planned a day just around smoking. It was Jay and his best friend B, and their girlfriends S and M. The four of them decided to drive to Mount Pisgah, a beautiful wooded area outside of Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, but it's nature in its prime for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and I know exactly what trail they were on. The main ones that connect the parking lot to the river. They had driven in B's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and then walked to the river. On the way to the river from the lot, there is a very small bridge that crosses a small creek. The group spent the day out there swimming and puffing and swimming, just being typical Oregonian teens. I can imagine that hunger is what drove them to go home after a few hours, as the sun began to set. Either activity alone is bound to get someone hungry, let alone both. So, they walked along the well-worn main dirt path to the parking lot. This path has since been paved according to Google Maps. It doesn't take but 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot that they had crossed when they hiked in. When they reached the small footbridge near the parking lot, B looked out into the vast field between them and the wooded mountain, and noticed a huge dog near the tree line, I'd say about 100 yards away. They all later described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. The dog was just sitting there, not looking scary, just looking like a humongous friendly dog. It was starting to get dark, but from M&J's descriptions and the drawing she did for me later in 2005, it was very shaggy and furry. I mean, even still, have that notebook where she drew the dog thing. If I find it, I'll post it. My friends continued to walk across this small wooden bridge, and one of the girls screamed. The big dog was now on its hind legs, standing much closer than when they had seen it just a couple of seconds earlier. It had traversed most of the large field in the seconds it took them to get across this 10-foot-long bridge. Whatever this thing was, it was fast, quiet, and stealthy. My four friends ran to the car, and they had the classic cliche, "I can't get the key in," because B was fumbling madly for the keys. At this point, the dog was standing on its hind legs at the very edge of the parking lot, looking at them menacingly. Still had the dog face, still had the dog body, just standing up. They never saw it walking on all four or just two. It was like every time they looked up, it was just standing there closer. As Jay had said, every time they looked up, he was closer but not moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see a dog standing on its hind legs. I don't know if it ran for a few ticks and then stood up again at intervals in the field, but that's the way they describe it. Many times I asked them, "Are you sure it wasn't a bear?" No, it definitely was a dog standing on its hind legs. A big dog that was stalking them. Also, this is in Lane County, Oregon in the year 2000. There are few if any bears out there. It would be odd, but then again I wasn't there. The kids got into the car and sped off, leaving the Pisgah dog to his own business. I've never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, S doesn't even like to talk about the incident at all, because it's just too creepy for her to recall. Before I start this story, let's just get the simplicities out of the way. We'll refer to my friend as T, my friend's mom as L, and my friend's stepdad as S. This was in northern Michigan. We drove around a lot that night, and I don't exactly remember where this was. I was hanging out with T, who was going to be moving out of state soon. As of kind of last hurrah, T, L, and S all decided that we would spend that night taking pictures in graveyards to try and capture pictures of orbs. There was a graveyard that one of them said they had been to that was super creepy and cool. It was about an hour away and in the middle of the woods. Obviously, a fantastic idea after midnight. We reached the road that this graveyard is supposedly somewhere on. The road is dark. Again, it's like 1 or 2 in the morning at this point. It's a thin, one-lane dirt road and is framed on either side with walls of trees. The graveyard is only supposed to be about 10 minutes up the road. So we drive, and drive, and drive, and drive, and drive. The GPS starts acting up, saying we are still at the beginning of the road. We've been driving for almost an hour at this point, and I'm trying not to show T that I was freaking out, since I think I'm too cool to show fear. But I'm getting a chill at my spine at this point. S, who's driving, doesn't notice or care and just keeps driving, just being irritated that we're lost. T and her mom just sit there, as tense and uncomfortable as I am. As I start having a low-key panic attack, L starts telling S that we need to turn around now, turn around now. S sighs and pulls a U-turn, barely able to with a little bit of grass on either side of the road before the walls of trees. We're driving back the way we came, and the GPS suddenly shows that we're at the graveyard. S starts saying how we should turn around because otherwise it's just a waste of gas. Less than 5 minutes after we turn around, this thing crosses in front of us at an inhuman speed, visible for only a few seconds. It was humanoid, very lanky, and I want to say around 5 to 5.5 feet tall, scrawny with skin taut against the muscles that it had. It was naked and hunched over, kind of like an ape, its long arms dangling, the knuckles of its fingers scraping against the ground. It was a molted gray, almost looked like its skin was cracking with a darker gray, and its face was a bit longer than a human's, but not by much. And it had bat-like ears, which weren't huge but were definitely sticking up past its skull. The eyes were definitely bigger than a human's, but again, not by a significant amount. I'm pretty sure they were black, but honestly, I just know they were dark. It crosses the road and disappears before it's out of sight of the light. S doesn't react, but L and T start freaking out with a lot of, "Did you see that? Did you see that? Yeah, that was what I saw." I sat there shocked, and they asked me if I saw it. I nod slowly but refused to tell what I saw at first, as I wanted them to confirm it. L claims she only saw the outline, but describes the outline perfectly. T says something along the lines of like, "I saw that too, only it was like 3-dimensional. Finally, I tell them what I saw, and the car just goes quiet. We went straight back to T's after that, and had nothing else strange happen. Well, except for the fact that it only took us 10 minutes to get back off the road that we'd been on for an hour. I've read some stories about similar creatures, and have seen some art depictions that seem similar, but I can't quite pin this thing down with an official cryptid title. So does anyone have a clue what it was? Hello, I believe I may have seen a demon or a gargoyle of some kind. It was about 2 a.m. at the end of March, beginning of April. I was watching TV with the window open slightly. I kept hearing a muffled cry, almost like a woman crying in the distance. I finally decided to take a look and see what it was. I was looking all over the backyard and neighborhood, but didn't see anything. When I was about to give up, I heard it again. I noticed that it was coming from above me. I looked up and noticed something about 4 feet tall sitting on the peak of the house behind me. I grabbed my phone to take a picture, but when I was about to take the picture, it turned its head to look at me. It scared the crap out of me, then it dropped like it fell. Right before it hit the ground, its wings came out and it swooped away. I couldn't believe how big the wingspan was. I have no idea what this thing was, but it looked evil, and I don't want anything to do with it. Before I begin my encounter, if you're unfamiliar with redcaps, they're a type of malevolent goblin found in English folklore. I was a bit startled to discover this artist's depiction looks disturbingly similar to what I'd seen, except the head was significantly larger than the body in my case. Also, it wasn't wielding a weapon from memory. This was a very early childhood memory. I can't recall my exact age at the time, but I'd estimate that I was around 5 to 7 years old. Unfortunately, I can only recount a small, specific point in the story, but nonetheless, this is what happened. I was in my parents' bedroom, crying in fear as I witnessed what appeared to be a very short, malicious-looking, fair-skinned goblin wearing a pointed red cap. It simply stood at the end of the bed, laughing maniacally at me. My mother was trying to calm me down and had no idea why I was so hysterical, since she couldn't see or hear anything. So seemingly, only I was able to see this entity. That's all I can remember. Sadly, I have absolutely no recollection of what happened after that and never saw this being again. Does anyone have any thoughts or insight as to what they believe I have witnessed? I have had one problem with sleep paralysis for as long as I can remember, and it seems to get worse during times of stress, but I usually don't go more than 6 months without an episode, and they tend to happen in clusters. This particular episode happened around 4 years ago, and it has always unsettled me. Basically, this happened during a time when I was in the middle of a cluster of episodes, but this was the only time I've seen this particular thing. I decided to take a nap around midday on my couch. I was situated so that I wasn't quite facing my living room, but I could see if I moved my eyes. I fell asleep and suddenly woke up not being able to move anything other than my eyes, and feeling like I was pushing against my mind trying to wake up. The best way I know how to describe it is like I'm in really deep water trying to swim to the surface, but there's a current going against me. This is all fairly standard sleep paralysis stuff for me, but what I saw is not. I became aware of something looking at me. I moved my eyes to the far end of the couch, and there was something there, a few feet past the end of my couch. The creature was a light gray humanoid with long, spindly limbs. It was hairless and crouched so that its knees were more or less by its ears. It was gaunt to the point where I could see its bones through its body. I thought that it was maybe spiky as well, like at its elbows, etc. I can't remember its face anymore, and I would be afraid to come up with something in case my memory was influenced by something else. I remember this feeling of deep dread, especially because I was essentially helpless. Worse, I was in and out of consciousness, and every time I woke up again, I was still paralyzed, but it was closer. I tried to scream or move away, but I was absolutely powerless to do anything except stare at it. Then, just like that, it was gone, and I woke up for real and could actually move. I was shaken up, but otherwise fine, and as time went by, I wrote it off as a bad dream. Still, whenever I thought about it, I had a lump in my chest and felt just disturbed, like there was a feeling of plain wrongness to this thing. Eventually, I mostly forgot about it until now. I was reading through some of these other postings and freaked out when I read about crawlers. They sound extremely similar to what I saw, and make it a lot harder for me to blow it off. I had never heard of them before, and I had no idea they existed before this point, or that anyone else had ever seen anything like what I saw. The only thing that doesn't fit is that I haven't heard any of them. In my few hours of research being associated with sleep paralysis, and it seems like they're mostly seen outdoors. Mine was inside my apartment in the middle of a fairly big city. Does anyone know if what I saw fits? And if it isn't a crawler, could it have been something else? It's a lot harder for me to put this back into a box knowing that people have seen something similar to this. I was traveling westbound on Green Lakes Road and near the intersection with Pearson Road, on the northeast edge of Green Lakes State Park. As I approached the intersection, I noticed a large, hairy two-legged creature step out onto the road on my right, from the direction of the water. I'd estimate that it was about 30 yards ahead of me. When the creature looked in my direction, it quickly ran across the road and into the woods in Green Lakes State Park. By that time, I had slowed down in order to avoid hitting it or possibly others following. The creature was what I would identify as Bigfoot. It stood easily over 6 foot, and the eyes glowed a light orange color when it looked at me. From what I could tell, the hair covered most of the body and was a dark brown. The facial skin was very dark. I may have seen it for only about 5 seconds, and it moved quickly when it started to run. When it reached the woods on the other side of the road, several deer quickly exited and ran in front of me. I told my husband about the incident. He acknowledged that it was most likely a Bigfoot. He is a hunter and told me that he caught a glimpse of a similar creature in 2015 while hunting in the mountains. I grew up in a rural area of Calhoun County, West Virginia. The land we lived on had been in my father's family for many generations and was surrounded by hundreds of acres of woodlands. My sister and I were raised to respect our elders, not to question our parents. Our parents stressed attending and succeeding at school. My father was what you would call a handyman. There wasn't much that he couldn't do, even though he hadn't received much schooling. My mother was a homebody and didn't care much about traveling about. My sister and I were warned about the dangers in the world, especially those dangers close to home. Both our parents used to talk about the snowman. This was a terrifying spirit that lived in a hidden burial mound for most of the year. It would rise from the mound after the first snowfall and roam the area each night until the last frost. The snowman was feared by the Mingo people who once lived here in the early 1700s. My father told us that there was a great massacre of Mingo people that one night, not far from our home. The snowmans gathered the bodies and carried them to his hidden mound. He described the snowman as tall, rotund being with long white hair all over the body. But the most terrifying aspect was that the snowman had no face, just long white hair draped over from its head. We were warned not to venture out in the dark. The house was kept quiet during those winter nights because we didn't want to draw the attention of the snowman. In January 1979, my sister and I were both in our early teens. One evening around 8 p.m., we were in the kitchen doing homework at the table. Our father walked in from the living room and grabbed his coat by the door, then stepped out into the night. I asked my mother what he was doing, and she told me that he had forgot to bring in the firewood for the night. No sooner had she responded to my question, my father rushed through the door. He grabbed one of the kitchen chairs and wedged it on the door. Then he opened the cellar door and retrieved his 12-gauge shotgun and a handful of pumpkin ball shells. What had he seen? He stood at the door and said, "Snowman, he's out there." I ran upstairs to the attic so I can get a look out the window. My sister was right behind me. For almost 10 minutes we noticed no movement. Then my sister said, "Look at the garden." There it was. It was huge, maybe 8 feet high. It would stand, walk a few feet, then crouch down digging into the hard frozen ground. It continued to do so for several minutes. Then it stood up and moved closer to the house. Father was correct, there were no facial features at all. A second or two later it turned and moved into the woods. I never saw it again after that. My mother is still with us and continues to live in the old house. She says that she has heard this screaming at night, but believes it's the spirits of the Mingo people killed by the snowman. So, just to start off, this story is about a friend of mine, not me. Anyway, he has to drive back and forth between towns a lot because we live in a very small town. Less than 2,000 people, and he was just driving and talking to a friend on the phone when he saw roughly a 12-foot tall humanoid-looking creature standing on the median of the road. He says that it was too dark to tell very much about it, but he could clearly see limbs and the fingers on the creature. As he passed by the creature, it turned its body towards him. Needless to say, he floored it and cranked up his music. He also told me that he had a profound feeling of dread throughout the entire encounter, and he really doesn't ever get scared very easily at all. I was driving with him along the same road today when he told me about it. We didn't see it, and there were no visible traces of the creature that we could see from the car. What are your thoughts?